Welcome to part 2 of the most Canadian radio show in the world on CBC Radio One and Sirius XM.
My most Canadian moment is riding on a snow machine in RV at Nunavut, in the middle of what I thought was just an open tundra, stopping, hopping on top of the snow machine seat, adding an extension to the ice auger, and drilling through 6.5 feet of ice to fish for lake trout.
The most Canadian thing that I have ever done was get married in a lookout tower in a campground in Inuvik overlooking the Mackenzie Delta. It was hot. We had come prepared for cold Arctic weather.
It was hot in the Arctic?
It was about 30 degrees for 2 weeks. Uncomfortably hot in the Arctic.
Yeah, I was shocked at how much ice there was there, and the fact that we were actually on a lake when there's no real topography to indicate that.
Pretty Canadian.
Definitely.
Well, I think the setting was the most Canadian. Our witnesses were Grignon. Our celebration was over Arctic char served by Somalis in an Inuvik restaurant. All of that is quintessentially Canadian, I think. And we were swatting mosquitoes the entire time.
My name is Denis Grignon. Well, actually, it's Denis Grignon, and definitely not Denis Grignon. And no, I am not from Quebec. I've never lived there, in fact, just like millions of other Canadians whose mother tongue is French. We non-Quebec francophones are everywhere, and we look just like you. And we have our own distinctive way of parlez-vousing, adopting and sometimes adapting Anglo words and expressions for our unique non-Quebec vernacular.
One of the words where I come from that is mostly quite used, and it's an anglicism, is the word busted. Je t'ai busté.
Surtout par rapport à l'automobile, le bumper, les wipers, on va mettre l'auto dans le parking ou even le char.
And when my son wants to borrow money, he always says, je vais te payer back. Oui, c'est ça.
And there's also, tu vas tourner back, shoot la puck, moller first. And it took a bit of mining, but we managed to find the most Canadian franglais expression, thanks to Eddy, Evra, and Bradley from École Secondaire Saint-Joseph in Wawa.
A, Canadian. I think c'est plus un...
I think c'est plus.
Yeah.
But.
Pas comme
Non,
derrière.
comme A, but.
OK.
Je vais aller jouer au hockey après l'école, but après souper, il faut que je fasse mes devoirs.
OK, ben, il y a le mot hockey là-dedans. There's hockey in there, that's very Canadian, OK?
Je care pas vraiment quoi que je fais.
Puis là, je vais dire, I don't know, juste comme, je sais pas, des choses en même.
I don't know?
Ouais, des choses en même.
Did you catch that? She said, I don't know. Is there a more Canadian expression than one that basically says, well, what do you think? In any language.
My name is Demetrius Koutsoulis, and I think Life is a Highway is the most Canadian guitar riff of all time.
My name's Ray Marshall. One of the most Canadian guitar riffs is Sudbury Saturday Night by Stomp and Tom Connors. It's all about Tom, it's all about Canada, and obviously the Sudbury folks love it.
My name's Ryan from Kelowna, British Columbia. I play the drums. Probably my favorite Canadian guitar riff of all time would be New Orleans Sinkin' Tragically Hip. I can't imagine a more Canadian rock band than the Hip, and it's one of those riffs that the first couple of bars, you know that song right at the very top.
That, of course, is Limelight by Rush, and it's also my choice for most Canadian guitar riff. Now here's why. About 3 years ago, I was the comic MC for a show tour of Canadian Forces bases in Afghanistan. And on day 5, I was at Camp Suter in Kabul to do a show the following night. And I was feeling out of sorts, a bit anxious, and horribly homesick. I was on this makeshift patio outside the barracks, chatting to this very jovial soldier. And I noticed on his arm this tattoo, an image that I actually recognized from a Rush album. So I asked him if there was a connection. Well, I got about as far as "ruh" when he jumped in enthusiastically and told me he's a huge Rush fan and a Rush fan club member, and that he just purchased via iTunes and downloaded onto his Mac the new Rush documentary, Beyond the Lighted Stage. He then hooked up that documentary to the flat screen in Camp Suter's Canada House, where I got to see it for the first time. And for 2 hours, I felt at home. Now, I hadn't spoken to Sergeant Dan since then, but I felt I had to find him, especially today. Mr. Annika?
How's it going?
Well, it's such a thrill for me to talk to you after 3 years, and I've been telling people today and well, for years actually, about the time that you produced that private viewing of that Rush documentary for me and a small handful of people. If I remember right, you had a lot of trouble actually downloading that movie. Can you describe that for me?
Our internet connection in Kabul was not the greatest for our leisure, but I downloaded it in sections. I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and download an hour or two of it, and then wait till the next day.
And I can see you smiling now. Do you remember that moment when you hit play and you were able to watch it in this little outpost on the other side of the planet?
As soon as it finished downloading and said download complete, I was looking for a place to actually kind of hide for a couple hours for nobody to find me. I didn't have one. However, I told the guys, I said, guys, I got this new Rush video. Gotta watch it. Give me a couple hours. I'll be in my room if you really, really need me. And handed off the section to the 2 ICs, said you're in charge for a couple hours. You need those moments over there where you're just thinking of home.
What do you remember of that moment of hooking up your Mac and adjusting it and getting the sound right and bringing us all in? And it was early in the morning too. Do you remember any of that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I remember I didn't have the proper adapter to get the sound going, and so I had to have my laptop there. Playing the sound, which wasn't that high. You guys came into the camp, and the first thing I wanted to do was just welcome you guys.
For me, that experience of watching that documentary, that Rush documentary, that coincidentally was actually the most Canadian thing I've ever done. In fact, I didn't do it, you did it. What was it like for you to share that documentary with fellow Canadians and a couple of South Africans, if I remember right?
Yeah, there was, yeah. For me, that was just fantastic that everybody was actually interested in watching it, as well as I do believe one of the South Africans didn't even hear of Rush, if I'm not mistaken.
No, you're right. You were just vague or thought they were from the United States.
Yeah. So to introduce him to something that I find is one of the best Canadian bands ever, the best Canadian band ever in my mind, and since I was 5, memories that you'll treasure in a time where you need that sort of thing.
All right, well, Warrant Officer Dan Annika. So I'm pretty sure I know what band you're going to choose, but I am going to ask you, in your opinion, what is the most Canadian guitar riff out there?
Obviously from Rush, and it's gonna be the beginning of A Spirit of Radio. Probably one of the most popular songs played on the radio, and they do kind of slag the radio a little bit in it.
Is that kind of Canadian, doing that thing, slagging a radio station?
Do they apologize at the end of that song? That would be totally Canadian.
Rush's Spirit of Radio and Warrant Officer Dan Annika's choice for most Canadian guitar riff. There are so many riffs to choose from, really. So many great Canadian musicians. And I found a great musician to help us crown a winner.
I'm walking by myself.
Susie Vinnick is one of my favorite singer-songwriters, Canadian or otherwise, and a pretty darn good riffer in her own right. We met at Hughes' Room in Toronto right before she was to hit the stage. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, you too.
Look, how was the trip?
Always fine. There was a bit of congestion.
She admitted writing a great, identifiable, unique riff is a challenge.
Interesting question, because I approach songwriting in a number of different ways. Where I'll try to craft as much of the lyric as I can, so there's no riff involved. But sometimes those songs will write themselves, and then sometimes we'll be noodling around on the guitar and you get a riff.
So that's what Susie did. She grabbed her guitar, Mabel, which allowed her to better explore what it takes to write a good riff. And it helped her to determine that most Canadian riff.
This is Mabel.
This is Mabel. This is a good riffing guitar, is it?
That's my only guitar that I have here tonight, so I'll have to make it work.
It works for me.
There's only so many combinations that you can put together, I guess, and hooks and things like that. But
What kind of stands out? Like when you hear, you go, "Wow!" That as a musician, that really speaks to me.
I guess it's this catchiness factor. I don't know. I guess it's more specific to perhaps to the player. You hear a lick, and as a singer, like I can hear someone sing for a second, and know there's a timbre in the voice. And I think with guitar players as well, there's ways people play. Like you listen so much. You listen to so many different influences and things like that, and then they all start to come together in your hands and the way you play, and then you find your own voice. I still feel like I'm finding my own voice as a guitar player, but
you had mentioned even Neil Young. You can tell there's a very distinct kind of chord pattern.
Yeah, he's got. Well, I think his sound is quite grungy, and he's not like he's a great, I think, solid guitar player. And there's some players that they're very finessed, and the notes are all just so. Oh, that doesn't even sound right.
Actually, it does, because there's almost a rawness to it.
Yeah.
Maybe that's inherently Canadian. We don't want it to be too refined. We're hewers of wood and natural resources. Is there maybe a connection there? We want a little bit of rawness to it?
The rawness is a good word to describe it. And he's there, but it's every note, even though it might not be like a classically played piece. Yeah, there's a character to his playing. And you can hear a few notes and go, this is something new by Neil. Or you get people like Joni Mitchell, kind of different kind of riffing, a little folkier riffing. She's more complex sometimes in her playing. I think she does a lot of open tuning. I think she's got a photographic memory. So
now you covered one of her songs, right?
Yeah.
The Big Yellow Taxi.
I've covered a few, but the one I've recorded is Big Yellow Taxi. But I know when I go into the rhythm,
Can you do that?
Yeah, sure.
I want to see.
If I can go long enough, somebody will sing it,
A Canadian.
Some Canadian here tonight will sing it, and then know that that's Joni Mitchell. And there are certain like there's one I've got called Drive Fast, which was written with a friend of mine from the prairies who came to Toronto and had never been to Toronto before and never driven on the 400 series highways with me. It's called Drive Fast. Always in a hurry to get nowhere. Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
So we borrowed from Heart and Soul, but just that's what came to our minds. But that one is like that's a total like Toronto experience of being stuck in traffic.
In your opinion, what is the most Canadian guitar riff? We've had many suggestions, but we need one decision maker. What do you think it would be?
Well, gosh. I don't even know the right key. Yeah, taking care of business.
So taking care of business is the most Canadian one in your opinion. Why?
There's a pride in me that it kind of brings out because it's written by a Canadian and we're taking care of business. It's like it's got a good message, and I don't know, it just makes me feel Canadian when I hear it.
Canada's most Canadian guitar riff as selected by Susie Vinnick. Susie will be bringing her music to shows from Duncan, BC to Kincardine, Ontario this summer. Find out more at susievinnick.com. That's Susie with a Z, not a Z, by the way. You're listening to the most Canadian radio show in the world on CBC Radio One and Sirius XM.
Hi there, this is Karen Mason calling from Kelowna in beautiful British Columbia. After some discussion with my 16 and 12-year-old sons, I wanted to nominate The Red Green Show as the most Canadian TV show for your CBC radio special. Thanks so much and have a great day. Bye-bye.
My name is Janet and I'm calling from Ottawa. I think the most Canadian TV show ever is The Beachcombers, especially with Relic he was such a character, and he was always trying to scheme Nick out of his logs. But that's my most Canadian TV show ever. Thanks.
End of message. Hi, it's Kathleen James Cavan. I'm calling from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I'm calling to nominate Corner Gas as the most Canadian TV show. It has all the stereotypes of small-town Canada. The show is like its place. It's unassuming. It's apologetic. And in the show, the people are ritually suspicious of the nearest town, Woolerton, just like you hear all over Canada. Thanks. Bye.
This is Cynthia calling from Lindsay, Ontario. I think one of the most Canadian TV shows ever is Chez Hélène from the 1960s because it embraced both national languages and was geared to very young citizens at an age when they truly are language and culture sponges. Thank you.
Okay, what's the most Canadian thing that anyone's ever done? Well, this is one better left to an expert to determine, which is why I am walking up to the Principal's Lounge in Trent University. Hi, Davide.
Hi, how are you?
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. Come on in.
Great. I promise not to take too much. We found the perfect person to help us with our last category, the most Canadian thing you've ever done. Davide Panagia is the Canada Research Chair in Cultural Studies at Trent University. There were a lot of submissions in this category, and I gotta say, we Canadians do love our stereotypes. Stuff like listening to maple syrup drip from spigots as nearby beavers swam in and out of dams made of lacrosse sticks. Anyway, we chose 5 finalists and asked Professor Panagia for his expertise. Choose which one you feel best represents that most. and feel free
Whatever that is.
Whatever that is.
My name is Patrick Maliha. I live in Vancouver. I would have to say the most Canadian thing I've ever done was when I was living up north in northern Ontario. We would go to the dump and we would scare the bears. I can't think of anything more Canadian than a bunch of teenagers saying, let's go to the dump and chase the bears. I can't think. In the winter. It was in the winter too.
The most Canadian thing that I've ever done and continue to do is when I go through the drive-thru at Tim Hortons, I pay for the order of the car behind me. I do this simply because I think it's a nice thing to do, and it makes me happy thinking about them smiling. And that's what Canadians do.
That's very nice.
It is sweet. Now, is it the most Canadian one?
I've never been behind her.
My name is Mark Mitchell. I'm an inspector with the City of Kawartha Lakes Police Service. I stood on top of the Vimy Memorial. I could still go back and spend an entire day just walking those grounds. They're absolutely beautifully kept, and the stories, it's just overpowering with all of the names that are carved in there. And it's typically Canadian. It's not overstated, but it's hard not to just be, as I say, overwhelmed with pride at what our country accomplished. That's the most Canadian thing I've ever done.
My name is Ray Henderson, and I'm from Peterborough, Ontario, and the most Canadian thing I've ever done is hopped in a van with a friend, and we drove out to Vancouver, and it was an absolutely amazing trip to see so many Canadian things. And
what do you make of that one there, the trip to Vancouver?
It's pretty typical because of its emphasis on land and territory.
You know what? There is a second part to this.
Okay. We were there less than 2 days. And then we got there late Friday, and we left Sunday. Drove back, for the experience and to see the country, and it was absolutely breathtaking to see. And
why would you argue that your trip was more Canadian?
Because it, in the grand scheme of things, was probably unnecessary. It was worth it to us to drive there in 2.5 days and drive back.
So there
you go.
Yeah, that was.
You go. They weren't going to a place to be anywhere. They were going to be on, to drive across country. The objective was to drive across country, like the great train that went across the country, the Trans-Canada Highway that cut across the country.
Does that make it more Canadian because they went there and came right back?
I think it does. I think one of the characteristics that I would associate with that is being not necessarily goal oriented, but appreciating the grandeur. But in the Canadian Midwest is the vastness of it. I mean, you just get a sense of vastness, like it's never ending. And you know, and that's what it sounded like they were trying to get at on this journey. Not the destination, but to experience the vastness of it, the vastness of territory, of land. And it's not because of the trip per se, but because of the searching for the experience of vastness and grandeur.
So that trumped Bears, that trumped Vimy Ridge, that trumped Tim Hortons.
Well, the Vimy Ridge is that you actually have to go there, right? And not everybody goes to Vimy Ridge. I've never been. The Tim Hortons, you don't get that many Tim Hortons outside of Ontario. There's a lot fewer once you leave Ontario. So it's typical of Ontario, but it's not about Tim Hortons, but it's about, a certain image of Canadian kindness that you'll pay for the person behind you, regardless who it is. And the scaring of the bears, we had that seems very, very particular to, you have to have bears around, and most people don't have that.
So in the past hour, we've talked about the most Canadian snack, riff, giant thing, parlor game, franglais expression, and thing you've ever done. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't. You can join the discussion on Facebook or email us at mostcanadian@gmail.com. The Most Canadian radio show in the world was created by Sawdust Productions, which is myself, Denis Grignon, and Nancy Payne. Nance, are the boys around?
I think they're playing crokinole, then.
Ah, good on them. And a big, big thanks to CBC Radio's Nick Davis. And thank you for listening. And hey, happy Canada Day. Hope it's been your most favorite to date.
In Winnipeg, we used to play Fireball.
Fireball?
Fireball, yeah, in the winter, which is tennis ball in lighter fluid. And throw it at each other across the street, and it would make an arc of fire in the air, and that was Fireball.
I think that leads to my next question.
Right.
What is the most Canadian thing you've ever done? And is it that on fire mitten?
No. I think, as I mentioned to you before, I think the most Canadian thing that I've ever done is immigrated to Canada. I think that is one of the characteristics of Canada, is that I've met so many immigrants, and it's so much. It's one of the impressive things that, yes, people are born here, but so many people keep coming here.